Home Secretary explains ILR changes, 5 years to 10 years, benefits, dependents, and children. Full Q&A. Home Secretary was asked the questions millions of migrants are scared to ask out loud. Why are you extending ILR? Why are dependents being blamed? Why do high earners get a faster route? And what about children who grew up here? Her answers were direct, and some of them will shock you.
In terms of their salary expectations, you can expect that there will be a correlation between those numbers and then those who may then require assistance from the state having achieved settled status if we don't have a change in these rules. So it's not, I wouldn't mischaracterize it as deterrence. It is about managing what has been an uncontrolled wave of migration into the country. And I do think that we have to consider what the impacts would be if, with no changes, all of these people were able to obtain settlement at 5 years, which is what the current rules would allow.
We've heard quite a lot of evidence from various third sector and local organisations who've put the argument to us that this is going to have a negative impact, particularly on integration and cohesion. Is that something that you accept, that extending that length of time will inevitably have an impact on integration?
No, I disagree. Actually, if you look at our paper on the new proposals around earned settlement, the intention is to restore the element of contribution at the heart of the system. I think that our country is full of very tolerant people, very generous people. We're very open, but I do think there is a condition to that, which is about contribution. I think that if people feel the system is fair, well controlled, and that the people that arrive are contributing, and that is demonstrated and rewarded in the system, I think that does unlock actually a greater sense of cohesion. So I would disagree. Also, we are talking about people who are coming here to work. It is not unusual for any country in the world to want to change the rules, change the mix of people that are coming into work, look at how we decide how to fill our labour market shortages, and also to place expectations upon employers that they have to fulfil before they're able to bring workers here is absolutely, I think, perfectly legitimate, that we want to be able to make sure that first and foremost employers try to recruit people from home, that we have a better training and skills offer for workers here before we seek to fill shortages with workers from overseas. So I think it's perfectly fair and legitimate for us to want to have a controlled system that does place, burdens on employers. You can't just go off and bring people in from abroad. You have to play by some rules as well. I think that's fair enough, and I think that's what the changes are designed to do. Which, of course, we're consulting on some of the detail of the proposals, but the thrust of it is to obviously focus on getting a managed system that is well controlled, that deals with a particular problem that we saw over the last few years with such a large scale of workers, low skilled workers coming into the country, and I think that the totality of it can help us rebuild the case for a strong migration system that retains public support.
In this video, I'm breaking down a serious Home Affairs Committee session where the Home Secretary was questioned about proposed changes to settlement, ILR, and what she called earned settlement. I'm going to walk you through it exactly how it happened, question by question, answer by answer, in simple English. Subscribe now to UK Immigration Express. We bring up-to-speed clarity on immigration updates like never before. Let's dive in. This conversation didn't start with an attack. It started with a correction. The Home Secretary was clear from the very first question that she did not want these proposals described as deterrence. She pushed back immediately and said this was not about scaring people away. Instead, she framed it as a response to what she called an uncontrolled situation that had built up over recent years. In her words, the government was now having to manage something that had grown far beyond what the system was originally designed for. She explained that the issue wasn't only about the number of workers arriving in the UK, but also about the number of dependents arriving with them. She pointed out that in sectors like care work, around half of those who arrived were dependents of workers, something she described as unprecedented. According to her, this level of family migration had not been planned for and required a serious policy response.
Thank you for coming this morning. So, why are high earners more useful citizens than people who are not high earners?
Well, we are talking about a system of economic migration, so I think it would be odd to say that you're not looking at earnings. I mean, you know, you're looking for people to come and work, and the intention is that they can support themselves. You're not looking to bring in people who will ultimately require assistance from the welfare state, potentially for the rest of their lives. The point is to be making an economic contribution, and of course, we are in a competition with countries around the world for the brightest and the best talent. We want to grow our economy. There are, you know, big sectors in the tech world, in the development of AI, in our health service, where obviously there's global talent to be hunted after, and we would want to bring them into this country ahead of others. So I think, forgive me, but I would find it odd if we weren't trying to bring in the brightest and the best into this country. And of course, that does have a correlation with earnings as well.
Now, I quite understand that, but the demand in this country for workers is not always for high earners. We have large numbers of people who, for instance, work in the care sector, who are not high earners, but who are nevertheless extremely useful members of society, and we need to be able to attract people to come to work in those sectors. That's my first.
Yes, no, which I do understand, but what I would repeat back to you is that under the previous government there was an expectation of a market shortage for workers in social care of between 6,000 and 40,000. I mean, that is actually quite a big range, so it tells you that there's an unreliability in the understanding of exactly what the needs of that part of the workforce are. But I mean, there's no world in which you could say even at 40,000 that then you shouldn't have a response when in fact 616,000 people come. That was never what was envisaged. Half of them are dependents. I think it is right to then ask a question about what that means for the capacity of the welfare state to potentially absorb that number of people.
No, I absolutely get that. So some changes have already been put in place, and what I understand is that net migration may be falling to very, very low levels already. Do you anticipate, say by the end of this year, we may be in a situation where we've got more people leaving the country than are in fact arriving?
I mean, I would dispute that net migration is at very, very low levels. It's still really quite high in terms of it. I mean, it's had a big drop from the very large increases that you saw under the previous administration, but it is still comfortably at around over 200,000, isn't it? Yeah. So, which on any measure is still quite a high range. I mean, when I first came into Parliament, we were talking about migration in the tens of thousands back in the days of 2010 onwards. So, I'd say it's still pretty high. I mean, I'm not targeting a particular fall in net migration through these changes. What I'm targeting is a better managed, controlled system that can deal with this very particular problem we've now got of many hundreds of thousands of people arriving in the country, half of whom are dependents.
From there, she moved quickly to settlement. She said that under the current rules, once people reach settled status, they gain access to social housing and the welfare system, and if no changes are made, then all of those individuals would eventually become eligible after 5 years. She argued that because many of the roles involved are lower paid, it is reasonable to expect a correlation between settlement numbers and future reliance on the state. For her, this was the core of the issue, not deterrence, but managing long-term impact. That answer led naturally into the next challenge. Members of the committee pointed out that charities and local organizations had warned that extending the length of time before settlement could damage integration and social cohesion. They asked whether the Home Secretary accepted that keeping people in temporary status for longer would make integration harder. Her answer was firm. She said she did not agree. In her view, integration improves when the public believes the system is fair and well controlled. She described the UK as a tolerant and generous country, but said that generosity comes with an expectation of contribution. She argued that when people feel migration is controlled and that those arriving are contributing and being rewarded for it, cohesion actually increases rather than declines. She added that it is not unusual for countries to change their migration rules or adjust the mix of people they bring in to meet labor market needs. She defended placing expectations on employers as well, saying businesses should not simply recruit from overseas without first trying to recruit and train domestically. For her, this was about balance and fairness, not hostility. That brought the discussion to the heart of the government's proposal, earned settlement. One committee member asked what the real difference was between earning settlement and simply delaying it. They wanted to know whether the government was just stretching the process or fundamentally changing it. The Home Secretary's response marked one of the most important moments in the session. She confirmed that the government intends to move from a 5-year qualifying period for settlement to a 10-year baseline. Crucially, she said this change itself is not being consulted on. In her view, 5 years is a short period before someone can permanently settle in a country with a generous welfare state. 10 years, she argued, is more appropriate. She then explained how the system would work. 10 years would be the starting point, but people could shorten that period by demonstrating strong contribution. High earners, particularly those on global talent routes or paying higher band tax, could potentially reduce the wait down to as little as 3 years. At the same time, she said, the reverse would also apply. If someone accessed benefits or relied on the welfare state, their qualifying period could increase. She stressed that settlement would no longer be automatic. It would be earned by staying in work, paying tax, maintaining good character, and contributing economically. Settlement, she said, brings lifelong rights, and it is right that thresholds exist to show the public that the system rewards behaviors people expect to see. That explanation prompted a sharp follow-up. A committee member challenged whether this approach was really about contribution at all, or simply about rewarding high earners. They suggested that the policy risks valuing income over the real social value of work. The Home Secretary did not shy away from that criticism. She said plainly that this is an economic migration, and in that context, earnings matter. The intention is to bring people who can support themselves and make an economic contribution, not people who may rely on welfare long term. She also pointed to global competition, saying the UK must attract top talent in areas like technology, artificial intelligence, and healthcare. In her view, it would be strange if the UK were not trying to bring in the brightest and the best. However, committee members pushed further. They pointed out that the UK's labor needs are not limited to high-earning sectors. Care workers, for example, are essential, but not highly paid.
The Home Secretary acknowledged that, but returned again to the scale of recent migration. She said that under the previous system, projected shortages in care were in the tens of thousands, yet arrivals reached hundreds of thousands when dependents were included. That gap, she argued, showed the system had expanded far beyond what was envisaged.
Evidence we've received from immigrants, we're finding that they've planned their lives around a 5-year route, that's selling property in their home country, turning down other jobs, delaying having children. Do you think it's fair to these people for the terms of their route to settlement to be changed after they've already arrived?
Look, I think what's fair is that a government and a country should be able to respond to the circumstances that we face. And I think that it's actually, we have 2 set-piece rule changes every year, usually in April and then in the autumn for immigration rule changes. It's not uncommon for us to change our rules. These are obviously bigger changes, but they are there because they're dealing with a much bigger set of circumstances. As I say, the numbers of migrants into the country between 21 and 2024 is an unprecedented level. The changes on the skills levels required to come to the country and the numbers of dependents that have arrived, I think does demand an answer from the government. And what you're trading off is a set of potential obligations to people who've come to the country versus your obligations to your citizens and your own long-term residents in the country as well. So there is a choice here and there's a trade-off here, and we're trying to find a balanced way through what is a very difficult problem. And I think that the proposals that we put forward are trying to meet that policy intention. But as I say, we do recognise that these would be big changes. They could have some unintended consequences. There might be groups that we weren't aware of.
I think we can take from this, it's a consultation and you are consulting.
It's a genuine piece of work, and I do recognise that there are big changes that are potentially happening here. What I would say, despite the fact that we're consulting, it is inconceivable that literally nobody who's currently here would be affected by any of these changes, and I think we should just be upfront about that. But beyond that, obviously, we will see what the responses say.
From there, the discussion turned to accountability. One member asked whether ministers during the 2022-2023 period had any real control over what was happening and whether they were aware of the numbers coming in. The Home Secretary said she could not access the internal papers of the previous government, but argued that the publicly available data showed a clear surge. She added that even as a constituency MP, she was seeing casework where people believed they were coming to work in care only to be exploited by providers that later shut down. To her, that demonstrated how quickly the system had grown and how poorly regulated parts of it had become. The committee then returned to the moral core of the debate. One member asked directly why high earners were being treated as more useful citizens than those on lower wages. The Home Secretary repeated that economic migration is about economic contribution and that earnings are one way of measuring that. But she also acknowledged the need for workers in lower-paid sectors and said the Migration Advisory Committee would continue advising on shortages. Still, she insisted that numbers matter. She argued that no welfare system can absorb unlimited numbers, especially when half of arrivals are dependents. For her, this was not about judging individual worth, but about managing scale. That set the stage for a crucial question. Was the government trying to encourage people already in the UK to leave, or was the aim simply to restrict access to public funds while keeping the numbers the same? The Home Secretary said the consultation remains open on this point. She explained that there are two possible approaches: changing what happens at settlement, such as access to benefits, or extending the qualifying period further for certain groups. She said she was open-minded about which option is better. However, she also made something clear. The intention is not to stop people from ever gaining settlement. If someone completes the qualifying period, meets the requirements, and demonstrates contribution, they can still settle. But she acknowledged that some people will not meet the new criteria, and in those cases they would not have a basis to remain. The conversation then moved to citizenship. A committee member asked whether the government wanted fewer people becoming British citizens and whether children who arrive as dependents should be encouraged to aspire to citizenship. The Home Secretary said she is not targeting citizenship numbers specifically. She noted that once someone gains settled status, the path to citizenship is relatively quick under current rules. That, she said, is why the relationship between settlement and citizenship is being examined. On children, her response was more controversial. She said that whether children aspire to citizenship is a personal and family decision. Parents choose to bring children with them, she argued, and parents are responsible for those choices. The state sets the rules, but it cannot take responsibility for every life decision families make. This led into one of the most pressing questions of the session: transitional protections. Members asked whether people already in the UK, especially those in essential sectors, would be protected from sudden changes. The Home Secretary said the consultation includes a specific question on transitional arrangements. She explained that the proposed mandatory economic contribution threshold is relatively low, tied to the point where someone begins paying national insurance. She acknowledged that some groups may struggle to meet this threshold, including dependents, carers, people with disabilities, women on maternity leave, and part-time workers. She confirmed that many consultation responses raise these concerns and said the government is considering exemptions or alternative arrangements. She also mentioned discussions around whether contribution should be measured by household income rather than individual earnings, but she stressed that no decisions have been made yet. Then came the question many migrants fear most. Committee members pointed out that people planned their lives around a 5-year route to settlement. They sold property, turned down other opportunities, and delayed major life decisions. Is it fair, they asked, to change the rules after people have already arrived? The Home Secretary said governments must be able to respond to changing circumstances. She noted that immigration rules are amended regularly and that the scale of migration between 2021 and 2024 was unprecedented in terms of numbers, skills mix, and dependence. That, she said, demands an answer. She framed the issue as a trade-off, obligations to those who arrived under previous rules versus obligations to citizens and long-term residents. She acknowledged openly that it is inconceivable that no one already in the UK will be affected by these changes. She also clarified a legal point that caused anxiety. Applications for ILR are assessed based on the rules in force at the time of application, not the rules that existed when someone entered the country. She said this principle has been upheld in case law since 2009 and is not a new invention. Finally, the committee turned to children. Members described evidence they had heard about children living in uncertainty, sometimes referred to as state-sponsored unwantedness. They asked how children could be placed on different settlement routes based on factors outside their control. The Home Secretary said children in care and unaccompanied minors are excluded from these proposals, and that previous commitments for young people who discover they lack status at 18 remain unchanged. But for dependent children, she repeated that their presence results from parental choice. She acknowledged that the system will need careful pathways for children, especially arriving at different ages, and said this is still being designed through consultation. She did not deny the complexity, but insisted the government must still respond to the scale of recent migration. By the end of the session, one thing was clear. The government believes the migration system expanded too quickly. It believes settlement came too fast, and it believes contribution must be measured, rewarded, and enforced more strictly. What remains uncertain is how these ideas will translate into final rules, and how many people already here will be caught in the transition. That uncertainty is exactly why this conversation matters, and it's why millions of people are watching what happens next.